The clippers buzzed so loudly that for a moment, Chioma thought it was all a bad dream. The sound echoed off marble walls, sharp and mechanical, cutting through her screams as clumps of her hair dropped to the floor like pieces of her dignity. One hand stretched forward in desperate pleading. The other clutched her swollen 8-month belly, shielding the life growing inside her. "Please, I'm pregnant," she cried. But the woman in red didn't stop. She smiled. And behind them, standing comfortably in the doorway of his own luxury home, Chioma's husband raised his phone and pressed record. He didn't shout. He didn't intervene. He didn't even look conflicted. He watched. This wasn't a fight. This wasn't an accident. This was planned. Because just hours earlier, he had made a bet, one that said he could break his pregnant wife's pride in a single afternoon. And this was his proof. But here's the part that changed everything. When the clippers finally stopped, when the last strand of hair fell, when the humiliation was complete, Chioma didn't scream. She didn't curse. She didn't collapse. She went quiet. So quiet that it confused them. And in that silence, something terrifying began to take shape, something her husband and his mistress would not understand until it was far too late. Because Chioma wasn't surrendering. She was remembering. She was observing.
She was documenting.
And what she did next didn't just end a marriage. It exposed secrets, destroyed an empire, and shocked the entire world. Stay with me, because this story is not about cruelty. It's about what happens when a woman stops begging and starts collecting evidence. If you believe silence protects abusers, smash the like button. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. And comment below. If you were Chioma, what would you have done in that moment?
Now,
let me take you back to where it all began. The clippers buzz still lived inside Chioma's ears like a cruel echo, even though the sound had stopped. In the bathroom mirror, her reflection looked like a stranger. Tear tracks cutting down her cheeks, loose strands of hair stuck to her skin, her belly rising and falling with panicked breaths. And behind that reflection, like a shadow she couldn't shake, was the memory of Connell's face in the doorway. Calm, amused, recording as if her humiliation was a clip worth saving. But that moment didn't begin in the bathroom. It began long before clippers, before Vanessa's red dress, before the hair scattered on marble like fallen feathers. It began in the kind of love story people admired from far away. From the outside, Chioma's marriage looked like what women prayed for. Lucky Phase 1, where the gates were taller than most people's dreams, and even the air carried that clean perfume of money. Their compound was the kind with trimmed hedges that stayed obedient, security lights that never blinked, and a driveway that always looked freshly washed. Connell's cars sat like polished trophies under the bright Lego sun, one for business, one for weekends, one for when he wanted to remind the world who he was without saying a word. People used to look at them the way people look at a couple on a billboard. Matching smiles, matching outfits at charity galas, matching laughter when cameras came close. In photos, Connell always leaned slightly toward Chioma, like a man who adored his wife. He held doors. He carried her clutch. He rubbed her hand gently when she spoke to older women. Soft-spoken, composed, the perfect blend of traditional respect and modern class. The type of husband aunties like to point at and sigh about. See husband material. God when. Chioma, you're blessed oh. And Chioma believed it. She really did. Because she remembered the beginning. The early days when Connell would call her during lunch breaks, just to hear her voice. The way he used to come home with small thoughtful gifts, fruit she liked, a book she once mentioned, the exact kind of chocolate she craved. The way he said her name like it meant something. The way he looked at her like he was proud to be seen with her. Then success happened. Not the loud, sudden kind.
The slow kind.
The kind that arrives like a visitor who never leaves. Connell's business expanded. Meetings multiplied. Calls started coming at odd hours. His phone became a second heartbeat, always buzzing, always demanding attention. He started traveling more, returning with that tired smile that said, "I'm doing this for us," even when his eyes looked like he was somewhere else. At first, Chioma adjusted with the patience women are trained to develop. She told herself it was normal. Men got busy. Marriage matured. Love didn't always stay loud. Sometimes love became partnership. Sometimes it became quiet support. She watched other women in Lekki, women with husbands who moved like shadows through their own homes, and she convinced herself this was simply how it went. But the quiet in her own house wasn't peaceful. It was empty. The staff would greet Kunal with respect whenever he appeared, but even they moved differently around him now, as if he was no longer part of the household rhythm. Just a visitor passing through. He would come in, kiss Chioma's forehead like a man checking a box, ask a few surface questions without listening to the answers, then disappear into his study with his laptop and phone, the door clicking shut like a statement. Chioma started noticing little things. Small details that didn't announce themselves, but slowly refused to be ignored. Kunal's laugh changed. It became quicker, lighter, but only when his phone was in his hand. He began smiling at messages he never explained. When she asked who was calling, he would answer too fast, too smooth. Just work. When she asked why he needed to step outside to take the call, he'd shrug. Network is better out there. When she asked why he was texting at midnight with the brightness turned low like he was hiding the screen from her, he'd sigh like she was disturbing his peace. Chioma, you worry too much. And because she was pregnant, tired, swollen, sensitive, she questioned herself before she questioned him. She would rub her belly and tell herself, maybe I'm overthinking. Maybe my hormones are playing tricks. Maybe I'm just afraid because everything is changing. But fear doesn't come from nowhere. The baby inside her shifted more now, heavy and alive, turning her body into a house she carried everywhere. 8 months pregnant meant she moved slower, slept lighter, and felt everything deeper. Her feet swelled by evening. Her back ached like she was carrying a secret stone. And yet, even in all that, she still tried to keep the home peaceful. She still tried to be soft. Because the kind of women watching the story, women in America, women in the UK, women who had lived through relationships where their love did all the work, would understand that tired. The tired of trying to hold a home together with one hand while your body builds a child with the other. But Kunal did not respond to her softness. He responded to it the way some men respond to kindness when they no longer respect it, by treating it like weakness. If Chioma said she felt lonely, he would laugh gently like it was cute. Lonely in this big house? You have staff, you have AC, you have everything. If she asked him to spend time with her, he would glance at his phone and offer a promise that never landed. After this week. If she asked about the baby, about baby names, hospital choices, plans for the nursery, he would nod, say we'll see, and drift away like her words were background noise. He wasn't cruel in a loud way. He was cruel in an absent way. The kind of absence that makes you start wondering if you're even still married, or if you're just living near a man who used to love you. And every time she tried to push deeper, to insist on real answers, Kunal used the same weapon: dismissal. Pregnancy hormones. Drama. Emotional. He said it with a calm confidence that made her feel guilty for even opening her mouth. Like she was the problem for noticing what was obvious. Like her intuition was an inconvenience. It got worse when she began asking about the new name she kept hearing. Vanessa. It started as casual mentions. A business partner who was helping with a contract. A woman who knew someone in government. A woman who handled negotiations better than most men. Kunal mentioned her like she was an asset. Like she was a tool. Like she didn't have a face. Until she did. One afternoon, Chioma was in the living room when the front door opened and laughter flooded the space. Loud, confident laughter. The kind that doesn't ask permission. She looked up and saw Vanessa step in like she belonged there. Tight dress. Perfect wig. Perfume that arrived before she did. Nails done. Mouth full of boldness. Kunal followed behind her, smiling. Not the public smile he used at events. A private smile. Chioma felt it in her chest before she even understood it. Vanessa didn't greet her like a guest. She greeted her like competition. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, eyes sliding over Chioma's belly, her swollen feet, her loose home dress, as if assessing a product that had expired. And Cunnel didn't correct her tone.
Didn't set boundaries.
Didn't say, "This is my wife. Speak with respect." He just stood there and let it happen like he was watching two women react to each other for his entertainment. That was the first time Chioma's stomach tightened with something colder than jealousy.
Warning.
After that, Vanessa's presence grew like a weed in a garden nobody was tending. She came to discuss contracts, then to plan a surprise, then to help because you've been tired lately. Each visit lasted longer. Each visit came with more confidence. Soon she was sitting in Chioma's kitchen like a queen, sipping tea, giving staff instructions, calling Chioma sweetie, with that fake sympathy that burns worse than insults. And the staff stayed quiet, because money silences mouths. And Cunnel liked it that way. Chioma would catch the cook's eyes and see discomfort. She would see the housegirl pause like she wanted to speak, then swallow her words. The driver stopped making friendly jokes. Even the security man at the gate began avoiding her gaze, like the entire house had agreed to pretend something wasn't happening. And whenever Chioma brought it up, Cunnel's face would shift into that calm irritation that rich men use when they want you to feel small. "Vanessa is helping us. Stop being insecure. You're acting like a village woman." Village woman. The words landed with quiet violence. Because Chioma wasn't insecure. She was seeing. And seeing is dangerous when people are trying to hide. Nights became the worst. Cunnel would lie beside her, but it felt like sleeping next to a wall. His phone glowed in his hand. He would type, smile faintly, then turn his screen away when Chioma adjusted her pillow. Sometimes he would rise from bed and step out to the balcony, murmuring into the phone in a low voice, laughing softly like he had a second life that didn't include her. Chioma would lie there, belly heavy, heart heavier, listening to the faint sound of his voice outside, trying to make sense of a marriage that was slowly slipping through her fingers. And yet, she kept telling herself the same lie. This is normal. Successful marriages change. Men get busy. Love matures. Silence is peace. But her silence was not peace. It was her own instinct gagged with fear. Because deep down, Chioma knew something no one had told her directly, but every woman eventually learns. When a man starts calling your pain drama, it's because he needs you quiet enough to do what he plans to do. And she didn't know it yet, but Cunnel's quiet wasn't maturity. It was preparation. Preparation for a day he had already scheduled in his mind. Preparation for a humiliation he had already sold to an unseen audience. Preparation for a bet he believed he would win. And while Chioma was still trying to convince herself she was safe inside marriage vows and baby kicks, her husband was already rehearsing the moment her dignity would hit the floor, strand by strand, just to prove to someone else that she could be broken. And the saddest part? Chioma still thought love would protect her. She didn't realize love wasn't what was living in that house anymore. Something else had moved in. And it was already making space. Vanessa did not arrive like a storm. She arrived like a whisper. The first time Chioma met her properly, it was on an ordinary weekday afternoon, the kind that usually passed without memory. Chioma was in the living room, feet propped up, one hand resting on her belly, mentally counting the hours until evening when her back pain usually worsened. The house was quiet in that polite, artificial way big houses often are. Too clean, too controlled, too careful. Then laughter floated in from the front door. Not the restrained, polite kind. Not the kind guests use when they are unsure of their place. This one was loud, confident, settled. Chioma lifted her head just as Vanessa stepped inside, heels clicking against marble like she had walked that floor many times before. She was dressed sharply but casually, as if she'd mastered the balance between effort and effortlessness. Her hair was flawless. Her smile was wide. Her eyes were quick. Cunnel followed behind her, talking animatedly, smiling in a way Chioma hadn't seen in months. "Chioma," he said, gesturing vaguely, "this is Vanessa. I told you about her. She's helping with the Abuja deal. Helping. The word hung in the air like an excuse already worn thin. Vanessa didn't wait to be introduced properly. She stepped forward, extended her hand, and smiled with teeth. "So nice to finally meet you," she said, eyes flicking briefly to Chioma's belly before returning to her face. "Kunal talks about you all the time." It sounded rehearsed. Chioma forced a smile, shook her hand, and nodded. She told herself to be normal, to be polite, to be welcoming. After all, this was her husband's business partner. This was adulthood. This was trust. Vanessa stayed for 2 hours that day. 2 hours too long. She laughed loudly at Kunal's jokes. She touched his arm when she spoke. She sat too close on the couch, legs crossed in his direction, body angled like a statement. When Chioma offered drinks, Vanessa waved her off casually. "Oh, don't stress yourself. You should be resting more. Pregnancy is not a joke." The words were kind. The tone was not. Kunal nodded. "I've been telling her that," as if Chioma were a stubborn child. From that day, Vanessa began appearing regularly but never announced. She would call Kunal directly, not the house line. She would show up mid-morning or late afternoon, always when Chioma was most vulnerable. Tired, swollen, slower than usual. At first, Chioma tried politeness. She offered tea. She asked about work. She smiled when Vanessa corrected her on things she hadn't asked to be corrected on. She laughed when Vanessa made jokes that felt slightly sharp around the edges. Then politeness became patience. Chioma learned to endure the visits quietly, to sit through conversations that didn't include her, to listen to plans being discussed about her home, her husband, her future, without her input. She told herself it was temporary, that business deals end, that people leave. But Vanessa didn't leave. She settled. She began arriving with confidence, heading straight to the kitchen like it was her space. She commented on the meals with that soft, smiling criticism that is impossible to call out without sounding defensive. "Oh, you still cook like this? Kunal, you never told me she prefers heavy food. No wonder you're always tired."
Or,
"You look exhausted today, Chioma. Are you sure you're taking care of yourself properly? Pregnancy glow is supposed to glow." She would say it with concern in her eyes, sweetness in her voice, and judgment in every syllable. And Kunal would laugh. Or worse, he would say nothing. The staff noticed. Chioma noticed them noticing. The house girl would suddenly find something urgent to do when Vanessa entered a room. The cook avoided the kitchen when Vanessa was present. The driver kept his eyes forward when she sat in the front passenger seat beside Kunal, laughing as if they shared inside jokes. No one challenged her, because no one wanted trouble. And Kunal never corrected her. Not when Vanessa called Chioma sweetie, like she was a child. Not when she commented on Chioma's weight gain. Not when she casually rearranged things in the living room and said, "This looks better this way." The old setup was too traditional. Traditional. The word cut quietly. Each visit, Vanessa claimed more space. She took over conversations. She made decisions. She moved through the house with familiarity that hadn't been earned. Her bag often sat on the dining table. Her perfume lingered long after she left. Sometimes she left clothes behind, just a scarf, a jacket, little markers of territory. Chioma started feeling like a visitor in her own home. And the strangest part was how easily it happened. Not with arguments, not with shouting, but with repetition. Vanessa didn't need to announce her authority. She behaved like it already existed. One afternoon, Chioma overheard Vanessa speaking to the house girl in the kitchen. "No, not that plate. Use the white ones. Kunal prefers those." The house girl hesitated, glanced toward Chioma's direction, then nodded and complied. Something twisted in Chioma's chest. She walked into the kitchen slowly, belly heavy, heart pounding. "Those plates are for special occasions," Chioma said calmly. Vanessa turned, surprised for half a second, then smiled.
"Oh,
"I didn't know. Kunal never mentioned it." She said it lightly, innocently. Connell, sitting at the dining table, didn't look up. That was the moment Chioma understood something deeply unsettling. Vanessa wasn't taking Connell from her. Connell was handing him over,
piece by piece.
Every time Chioma raised a concern, Connell's response was the same. Gentle dismissal. You're reading too much into it. She's just confident. You're sensitive these days. You're pregnant. Everything feels bigger. The words became a wall. A smooth, polished wall that made Chioma question herself before she questioned him. She began replaying conversations in her head, wondering if she'd imagined the disrespect. If she was exaggerating. If she was becoming the insecure woman men complained about in group chats. So she tried silence. She stopped engaging. She stopped offering opinions. She stopped reacting. But silence didn't protect her. It invited escalation. Vanessa grew bolder. She started staying later into the evenings. She stayed for dinner. She stayed after dinner. Sometimes she stayed so late that Chioma would excuse herself to bed while Connell and Vanessa remained in the living room, voices low, laughter spilling out like secrets. From the bedroom, Chioma would lie awake listening to the sound of their voices, feeling the baby shift inside her like it sensed the tension. She would place her hand on her belly and whisper reassurance. She wasn't sure she believed herself. The staff began acting differently toward Chioma. More formal. More distant. Instructions now came from Vanessa as often as they came from Chioma. Sometimes, when Chioma gave an order, she noticed hesitation, as if the staff were waiting to see who had the final say. That hurt more than the insults. Because authority isn't taken in one moment. It's eroded. Vanessa began speaking about the house, as if it were temporary. This place needs energy, she said one day, surveying the living room. It feels like a museum sometimes.
Connell laughed.
You and your ideas. Chioma didn't laugh. She watched. She watched how Vanessa sat in Connell's chair when he stood up. She watched how Connell unconsciously leaned toward Vanessa when she spoke. She watched how decisions were now being discussed without her. She watched how her own voice seemed to shrink in that house. And still, she hoped. She hoped marriage would correct itself. She hoped pregnancy would soften Connell. She hoped love would wake up. But love doesn't wake up when it's already been replaced. Vanessa was no longer visiting. She had moved in. Not physically, not yet, but in presence, in influence, in control. And Connell allowed it, watched it, encouraged it with his silence. Chioma felt it one evening when she stood in her kitchen, watching Vanessa sit comfortably at the counter, legs crossed, laughing as she scrolled through Connell's phone, showing him something. Chioma realized then that the house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a stage. And she was no longer the lead. She was just the woman carrying the baby in the background while another woman learned the lines. And what Chioma didn't know yet, what no one in that house knew yet, was that this slow invasion was not accidental. It was practice. Vanessa wasn't just testing boundaries. She was rehearsing. And Connell wasn't ignoring it. He was preparing to prove something. Very soon. The night Chioma heard the truth, it didn't arrive with shouting or confrontation. It slipped out quietly, the way poison does, unnoticed at first, already working its way through her system before she understood what it was. It was late. One of those heavy Lagos nights where the air sat thick against the skin and sleep came in broken pieces. Chioma lay on her side, pillow tucked under her belly, trying to find a position that didn't make her hips ache. The baby shifted inside her, slow and insistent, reminding her that her body no longer belonged only to her. Connell wasn't beside her. She noticed the absence before she noticed the sound. His side of the bed was cold, untouched. No phone charging on the nightstand. No faint glow of a screen. Just absence. She pushed herself up slowly, careful not to strain, and listened. That's when she heard his laugh. Not loud. Not public. A low, private laugh drifting in from the balcony, carried by the night air. The kind of laugh people use when they think they are unobserved, when they are speaking freely. Chioma held her breath. The balcony doors were slightly open. She could hear the faint hum of traffic far below, the distant music from somewhere in Lecky, and Connell's voice, soft, relaxed, unguarded. "She won't leave," he said. The words landed like a tap on glass.
Light.
Almost nothing. Chioma froze. "She can't," Connell continued, amusement threading his tone. "Pregnancy makes women stubborn. They think it's protection." There was a pause. Chioma could almost imagine the person on the other end of the line. The shared smile. The understanding. Then Connell laughed again. "I told you I could break her pride in one afternoon." The world tilted. For a moment, Chioma thought she had misheard. Her mind tried to correct the sentence, soften it, rearrange it into something less violent. But the words didn't change. They stayed exactly where they were, heavy and clear. Break her pride. One afternoon. Connell said it like a boast, like a man describing a trick he'd already perfected. Chioma pressed her hand against her belly, suddenly aware of how fast her heart was racing, how shallow her breaths had become. The baby kicked once, sharply, and she winced, not from pain, but from fear. This wasn't an argument. This wasn't frustration. This was a plan. She stayed where she was, silent, afraid that even the sound of her breathing might alert him. Connell continued speaking, his voice dropping lower, more conspiratorial. "I know her," he said. "She likes to act strong.
Moral.
Enduring. But everyone has a breaking point." Another pause. A murmur of agreement from the other end. Connell chuckled. "Trust me." Chioma didn't hear the rest. She didn't need to. Her legs felt weak as she eased herself back onto the bed, pulling the covers up as if they could shield her from what she'd just heard. Her mind raced, replaying the sentence again and again, each repetition carving it deeper into her chest. Break her pride. The words made something inside her shift. Something cold and instinctive, like an alarm finally screaming loud enough to be heard. When Connell came back inside, he moved casually, unbothered. He slid into bed beside her like nothing had happened, the mattress dipping under his weight. His phone buzzed once, and he turned it face down without thinking. "Couldn't sleep," he said lightly. Chioma didn't answer. She stared into the darkness, listening to the sound of his breathing, feeling the distance between them stretch wider than the bed itself. Morning came with cruel normalcy. Sunlight filtered through the curtains. The house woke up. Staff moved about quietly. Life continued as if nothing had fractured in the night. Chioma moved through the morning like she was underwater. Everything felt slower, heavier. She noticed details she might have ignored before. The way Connell avoided her eyes, the way he checked his phone before greeting her properly, the way his mouth twitched like he was holding back a private smile. She waited. She didn't know what she was waiting for. An explanation, a confession, a sign that she had misunderstood. But she waited. It came in the afternoon, when Connell found her sitting alone in the living room, her legs propped up, her face pale. "You've been quiet," he said, sitting across from her. "Is everything okay?" The concern sounded practiced. Chioma looked at him for a long moment. She studied his face, searching for the man she thought she knew, the man who once held her like she mattered. What she saw instead was composure, control,
Distance.
"I heard you last night," she said quietly. Connell didn't react at first. Then his eyebrows lifted slightly, just enough to suggest surprise, not fear. "Heard what?" he asked. "The call," Chioma said. "On the balcony." A flicker passed through his eyes. Calculation. Then calm. "Oh," he said, waving a hand dismissively. That. As if it were nothing. "As in," Chioma continued, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest, "you saying you could break my pride in one afternoon." Connell leaned back, exhaled slowly, and smiled. Not cruelly, not angrily.
Casually.
"Chioma," he said, "you're taking it too seriously." Her stomach dropped. "It was just talk," he continued. "Men talk. We exaggerate. You know how it is." She stared at him. "You called it a plan," she said. "You said you could break me." Connell shrugged. It was a bet. The word hung between them. A bet. Chioma repeated. Yes, he said calmly, like he was explaining a rule of a game. A harmless one. Harmless. With who? She asked. Connell smiled faintly. Friends. What kind of friends bet on humiliating a pregnant woman? Chioma's voice cracked despite her effort to keep it even. Connell's expression hardened slightly, not with anger, but with irritation. You're not being humiliated, he said. You're being dramatic. The word landed with practiced ease. It's about control, he continued, as if she were slow to understand. About knowing your partner. You've been acting defiant lately, like you think pregnancy gives you immunity. Chioma felt the blood drain from her face. So this is about teaching me a lesson? She asked. Connell chuckled softly. Don't twist it like that. Then explain it, she said. Explain why you joke about breaking my pride. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice calm, confident. Chioma, you're strong. I know that. But strength without humility becomes a problem. I was making a point. To who? She asked. To myself, he replied. To others. That I'm still in control. Control. The word echoed in her head. This wasn't love gone wrong. This wasn't misunderstanding. This was power being tested. Chioma looked down at her belly, at the life growing inside her, and something inside her settled with terrible clarity. Connell wasn't afraid of losing her. He was afraid of not owning her. And the bet wasn't a joke. It was a promise he intended to keep. She felt it then, the shift. The invisible line crossing. The moment when fear stops being confusion and becomes understanding. Chioma said nothing else. She nodded once, slowly, as if she accepted his explanation. Connell relaxed, misreading her silence the way men like him always do. He stood, adjusted his shirt, checked his phone. Get some rest, he said lightly. You think too much. As he walked away, Chioma remained seated, her hands folded over her belly, her mind no longer racing, but sharpening. Because now she knew. This wasn't about Vanessa. This wasn't about jealousy. This was a man testing how far he could go. And she also knew something else. When someone tells you exactly what they plan to do to you, the worst mistake you can make is not believing them. Chioma believed him. And from that moment on, she stopped trying to save her marriage. She started preparing to survive it. Vanessa returned the next afternoon like nothing had happened the night before. She didn't knock. She didn't announce herself. She walked into the house wearing red, the kind of red that demanded attention, that refused softness, that warned before it wounded. In her hand was a small black bag, plain and unremarkable, the kind that could carry anything. Connell followed behind her, relaxed, almost cheerful, as if this were another ordinary visit. Chioma was in the living room when she heard the heels first. Sharp, confident, too familiar. Her stomach tightened before her mind caught up. The baby shifted inside her, restless, pressing against her ribs. She placed a hand over her belly instinctively, as if bracing for impact. Vanessa smiled when she saw her. Sweetie, she said, voice light. You're home. Connell didn't look at Chioma. He moved toward the hallway, phone already in his hand, screen glowing like a silent accomplice. We need to talk, he said calmly, as if this were overdue housekeeping. Chioma stood slowly, her body heavy, her heart louder than her footsteps. About what? She asked, though she already knew. Vanessa answered by opening the black bag. The clippers caught the light as she pulled them out. For a second, the room didn't make sense. Chioma stared at the object in Vanessa's hand, her brain struggling to connect it to reality. Electric clippers didn't belong in this house. Not like this. Not now. No, Chioma said immediately, backing away. No. What is that? Vanessa tilted her head, smiling. Relax. It won't take long. Chioma's eyes flew to Connell. Connell, she said, her voice rising. What is this? Why is she holding that? Connell leaned against the wall, arms folded, expression unreadable. His phone was already angled slightly upward. Just listen, he said. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. The words sent a chill through her. Vanessa moved fast. Before Chioma could turn, before her body could react properly, Vanessa's hand was in her hair, fingers digging into her scalp, yanking her backward. Pain exploded instantly, sharp, blinding, ripping a scream from Chioma's throat. "Stop!" Chioma cried, grabbing at Vanessa's wrist. "Stop!
I'm pregnant."
The baby kicked hard, as if startled by the sudden violence. Vanessa tightened her grip. "Exactly," she said coldly. She shoved Chioma forward, forcing her toward the bathroom. Chioma stumbled, her balance thrown off by the weight of her belly, her feet slipping against the smooth floor. She reached out for support, but Connell stepped aside, clearing the path. The bathroom door slammed shut behind them. Bright light flooded the space, harsh and unforgiving. The mirrors, too many of them, reflected everything. Chioma's wide eyes, her tear-streaked face, Vanessa's grip in her hair, her own swollen belly, vulnerable and exposed. Vanessa shoved her down onto a low stool. Chioma cried out as her knees buckled. The stool wobbled under her weight, cold and unforgiving beneath her thighs. Her hands flew instinctively to her belly, shielding it, her body curling inward in a posture older than thought. "Please," she begged, her voice breaking. "Please don't do this. Connell, please." Vanessa turned on the clippers. The buzz filled the room instantly, loud, mechanical, relentless. It swallowed Chioma's sobs, drowned out reason, vibrated through the air like a threat made solid. Chioma shook her head frantically.
No, no, no.
Vanessa leaned close, her breath warm against Chioma's ear. "If you move," she whispered, "I'll push you, and everyone will say pregnancy made you fall." Chioma froze. Her blood ran cold. The words were not a threat made in anger. They were measured,
Considered. Real.
She stopped struggling, her entire body trembling as the clippers touched her scalp. The first pass was agony. The vibrations scraped against her skin, pulling hair away with brutal efficiency. Strands fell to the floor in dark curls, landing softly, obscenely, against the white marble. Chioma screamed, the sound tearing out of her until her throat burned raw. Vanessa worked slowly, deliberately. This was not a rush. This was not a loss of control. She moved the clippers in clean lines, adjusting her grip, pressing harder when Chioma flinched. Hair fell everywhere, on the counter, on the sink, against Chioma's bare feet. Some clumps were already on the floor before Vanessa even started, proof that this wasn't spontaneous. Proof that this moment had been imagined long before it was executed. Chioma sobbed uncontrollably now, tears pouring down her face, her breath coming in panicked gasps. Her hands stayed locked around her belly, fingers digging into her own skin, as if anchoring herself to the only thing that mattered. "I'm pregnant," she repeated, like a prayer, like a plea that might still work.
Please. I'm pregnant.
Vanessa laughed softly. "You keep saying that like it makes you special." In the mirror, Chioma caught sight of Connell. He stood just outside the bathroom door, phone raised, recording everything. His face was calm, focused, almost pleased. He adjusted his angle once, stepping closer for a better view. He didn't flinch when Chioma screamed. He didn't intervene when Vanessa pressed harder. He didn't even look conflicted.
He watched.
Like this was the climax of something he'd paid to see. Chioma's screams grew hoarse, her voice breaking into ragged sounds that barely resembled words. Her scalp burned where the clippers passed again and again. In some places, Vanessa pressed too hard, scraping skin, drawing sharp, stinging pain that made Chioma gasp. "Hold still," Vanessa snapped, irritated now. "You're making it uneven." Uneven. The word felt unreal. Chioma's head bowed forward under the weight of it all, her chin trembling against her chest. She could feel the cool air against newly exposed skin, could feel tears and sweat mixing as they slid down her face and dripped onto her lap. The mirrors showed her everything. Her humiliation from every angle. Her hair, once carefully maintained, once praised, now reduced to scattered evidence on the floor. Her swollen belly rising and falling rapidly. Her eyes wild with terror and disbelief. This wasn't just happening to her.
It was being documented.
Vanessa finished one side and stepped back briefly, surveying her work like an artist assessing a canvas. Then she moved to another section, starting again. "This is what happens," she said calmly, "when women forget their place." Chioma's sobs quieted into broken breaths. Her throat ached too much to scream anymore. Something inside her began to shut down, not from acceptance, but from survival. Her mind retreated inward, focusing on one thing only: stay still, protect the baby, endure. The buzzing continued. Minutes stretched into something shapeless. Time lost meaning. Finally, the clippers clicked off. The sudden silence was almost worse. Vanessa stepped back, satisfied. "Now look at you," she said. Chioma lifted her head slowly, meeting her own gaze in the mirror. Her scalp was uneven, raw in places, hair hacked away without care. She looked stripped.
Exposed.
Smaller. Connell lowered his phone at last, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "That's enough," he said casually, like calling the end of a game. Vanessa dropped the clippers onto the counter with a soft clatter. "Told you," she said, glancing at Connell. "Didn't take long." Chioma sat there shaking, hair clippings stuck to her skin, tears still falling silently. Her body felt hollow, like something essential had been scooped out and discarded. Connell looked at her as if she were an object that had finally been adjusted correctly. "You can go to your mother's place later," he said. "I don't want drama here." Chioma didn't respond. She didn't cry harder. She didn't beg again. Something inside her had gone quiet. Vanessa smirked, satisfied with the silence. Connell turned away, already checking his phone, already moving on. Neither of them noticed the change. They thought the humiliation was the end. They didn't realize it was the beginning. Because as Chioma sat there, trembling, hair scattered around her like proof of cruelty, one clear thought cut through the shock, sharp and steady. They didn't just hurt her. They gave her evidence. And from that moment on, everything they thought they controlled began to slip through their fingers. Strand by strand, just like her hair on the marble floor. The silence didn't come all at once. At first, Chioma's sobs simply grew quieter, thinning into broken breaths that scraped painfully through her chest. Her shoulders still trembled, her hands still clutched her belly, but the sounds faded, as if something inside her had decided screaming was no longer useful. Vanessa noticed it first. "Stop shaking," she snapped, irritated as the clippers dragged unevenly across Chioma's scalp. "You're making this difficult." Chioma didn't answer. She didn't beg again. Her lips parted slightly, drawing in slow, deliberate breaths. In through her nose, out through her mouth. She fixed her gaze on her reflection in the mirror, not the hair falling, not the raw patches forming, but her own eyes. Wide at first, then narrowing, focusing. Her body was still trembling, but her mind had shifted somewhere else entirely. Connell noticed the quiet and mistook it for defeat. He adjusted his phone, zooming in slightly, waiting for another scream that never came. He expected pleading.
Collapse.
The messiness that always followed humiliation. That was the part that made power feel complete. Instead, Chioma went still. Her breathing slowed. Her shoulders dropped a fraction. The frantic energy drained out of her, replaced by something unnervingly calm. Vanessa slowed, confused by the lack of resistance. The clippers buzzed on, but her movements lost their sharpness. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Humiliation was meant to be loud. Hair continued to fall, landing softly against the floor, against Chioma's bare feet, against the hem of her dress. She watched it without reacting, cataloging the moment with quiet clarity. The sound of the clippers became distant, like background noise she no longer needed to fight. In that stillness, Chioma noticed everything. The way Connell's hand never shook as he recorded. The faint smile he didn't bother to hide. The way Vanessa leaned back slightly, enjoying the work, enjoying the control. The angle of the mirror. The exact position of the phone. Her fear didn't disappear, but it stopped owning her. The clippers finally clicked off. The sudden silence pressed heavily against the walls, ringing louder than any scream had. Vanessa stepped back, satisfaction blooming across her face as she surveyed the damage. She straightened, lifting her chin, pride evident in her posture. "Now you look like nothing," she said, her voice full of triumph. Connell lowered the phone slowly, eyes flicking between Chioma's reflection and the reality sitting on the stool in front of him. He expected tears, expected collapse, expected the aftershock. Chioma didn't move. She lifted her head slowly, carefully, as if testing her balance. Her eyes met Connell's in the mirror.
Direct. Clear.
Unblinking. For the first time since the clippers touched her scalp, she spoke. "Thank you." The word landed wrong. It hung in the air, misplaced, unsettling. Vanessa frowned. "What did you say?" Connell laughed under his breath, uneasy. "You're welcome," he said reflexively, though the response didn't sit comfortably in his mouth. Chioma's lips curved into something that wasn't a smile. She wasn't thanking them for the pain. She wasn't thanking them for the humiliation. She was thanking them for clarity, for confirmation, for crossing a line so publicly, so deliberately, that there would be no confusion left, no room for doubt, no space for excuses. Abusers expect chaos. They expect tears. They expect bargaining. They do not expect composure. They do not expect a woman to grow quieter instead of smaller. They do not understand silence that isn't surrender. Chioma rose slowly from the stool, steadying herself with one hand against the counter. Hair clippings slid off her shoulders and fell to the floor without ceremony. She didn't brush them away. She turned fully now, facing Connell directly. Her voice, when she spoke again, was calm, measured, almost gentle. "You should keep that video safe," she said. "You'll need it." Connell's smile faltered. "What's that supposed to mean?" Chioma didn't answer. She walked past them both, barefoot, head uncovered, dignity no longer something she was trying to protect, but something she had already reclaimed. Neither of them noticed the shift. They thought the silence meant she was broken. They didn't realize it meant she was done begging. And they had just documented the moment she stopped being afraid. Chioma moved through the house, like a ghost no one noticed. Barefoot, quiet, invisible. Connell didn't look up when she passed him. Vanessa didn't bother pretending she existed. To them, the humiliation had done its job. The crying had stopped. The resistance had ended. Order restored. That assumption gave Chioma freedom. She walked slowly, deliberately, past rooms she had once decorated with hope. Past framed photos, where her smile now felt like a lie. Her scalp still burned, every movement reminding her of what had been taken, but the pain sharpened her focus instead of dulling it. In the guest room, Connell's unofficial office, when he didn't feel like working in his study, she closed the door behind her and locked it softly. Connell never locked drawers.
He never thought he had to.
Chioma opened them one by one, memory guiding her hands. She remembered things now with startling clarity, moments she dismissed before, details she'd filed away without knowing why. A brown envelope tucked beneath old contracts. Property deeds. Her breath caught as she read the names. Vanessa. Plural. Not one property. 3. She took her phone out and photographed every page, steadying her hands before each click. She didn't rush. Rushing made mistakes. Another drawer. Bank statements. Transfers that made her stomach twist. Large sums moved quietly, regularly. Notes attached. Future security. For the baby. Her baby. Money meant for her unborn child redirected elsewhere. She swallowed hard, waited for the surge of emotion to pass, then photographed those too. On the desk sat Connell's old phone, the one he used when he drank too much and forgot which device was in his hand. She'd heard his voice on it before. Laughing, boasting, careless. She powered it on. The passcode was still the same. Her birthday. She almost laughed. Voice notes filled the screen. She played them through her earphones, volume low, heart steady. Connell bragging to friends. Connell laughing about control. Connell mocking her tears. Connell explaining the bet like a clever strategy. Each file was a nail. She saved them all. Backed them up.
Cloud.
Email. Hidden folder. External storage. She created labels.
Dates. Categories.
She became methodical. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioner and the distant sound of Vanessa laughing somewhere else, satisfied, oblivious. Chioma worked until the light outside shifted. When she finished, she sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, one hand resting on her belly. "It's okay," she whispered. "I've got us." Connell thought the shaving was the punishment. He thought the humiliation was the end. He never imagined it was the trigger. Because while they were celebrating her silence, Chioma was building something far more dangerous than rage. She was building proof. Chioma walked back into the bathroom with her phone in her hand, not shaking, not rushing, not asking for permission. Vanessa was still there, leaning against the counter, admiring her reflection like someone who had just finished a performance. Connell stood near the doorway, scrolling through his phone, already bored with the damage he had helped create. They both looked up when Chioma entered, surprised, not because she had returned, but because of how she returned. Her back was straight. Her breathing was even. Her eyes were steady. "You shaved my hair," Chioma said quietly, her voice calm enough to unsettle the room. "But you shaved your future too." Vanessa laughed. It came out sharp and dismissive, the sound of someone who believed the worst had already passed. "Please," she said, rolling her eyes. "Don't start acting dramatic now. The show is over." Connell scoffed. "Chioma, stop this nonsense. You've embarrassed yourself enough today." Chioma didn't respond. She stepped forward and pressed play. The bathroom filled with sound. Vanessa's voice, clear, cruel, unmistakable, rose from the phone. The threat, the mockery, the warning about pushing her and blaming the pregnancy. Every word echoed off the marble walls, bouncing back at the woman who had spoken them. Vanessa froze. Her smile faltered, just for a second. Then Connell's voice followed. His chuckle.
Low.
Amused.
Detached.
The sound of a man entertained by his wife's terror. The room went still. Vanessa reached out instinctively. "Turn that off." Chioma didn't. She lifted her phone higher, her thumb sliding calmly across the screen. Folders opened. Screens changed.
Dates. Files.
Photos. Property deeds with Vanessa's name printed neatly at the top. Bank transfers labeled for future security. Voice notes time-stamped months back. Chioma looked at Connell as she spoke again, her tone almost gentle. "If anything happens to me," she said, "or to my baby, everything goes public." Connell laughed once, weakly. "You're bluffing." Chioma turned the phone toward him. A scheduled email sat open. Journalists. Lawyers. An NGO. Attachments loaded. Subject line written. Timer set. Vanessa's face drained of color. Connell stepped forward, his voice dropping. "You wouldn't dare." Chioma met his eyes. "You dared." Silence stretched. For the first time since the bet, Connell understood. This wasn't a scared woman reacting. This was a woman who had prepared. And in that moment, the power shifted, quietly, completely. The bet hadn't broken her. It had exposed him. Chioma didn't argue. She didn't demand apologies. She didn't scream. She didn't explain herself. She simply turned and walked out of the bathroom. Connell watched her go, his mouth opening as if to say something, then closing again. For the first time since she had known him, he didn't know what words would work. Vanessa stood frozen by the sink, arms wrapped tightly around herself, confidence leaking out of her posture inch by inch. Chioma moved through the house with the same careful calm she had carried back into the bathroom. Each step was deliberate, each breath measured. In the bedroom, she pulled a small suitcase from under the bed. She packed slowly, folding clothes the way her mother had taught her. Neat, efficient, without emotion. Comfortable dresses. Documents. Her hospital file. Chargers. Nothing extra. Nothing sentimental. Halfway through, she paused and picked up her phone. She called one person. The line rang once before it was answered. "Auntie," she said softly. "It's Chioma. I need a lawyer. Today." There were questions on the other end.
Shock. Concern.
But Chioma didn't explain.
She didn't need to.
The man she was calling had known her father, had trusted him, had promised once, years ago, that if Chioma ever needed help, she would have it. "I'm leaving," Chioma added. "And I need protection." The response was immediate.
Calm.
Reassuring. Chioma ended the call and zipped her bag. When she stepped into the hallway, the house felt different. Quieter.
Smaller.
Like a place she had already outgrown. The staff stood still as she passed. No one spoke. No one met her eyes. But they watched. They watched the woman they had seen humiliated walk past them with her head uncovered, her belly forward, her spine straight. Connell stood near the door as she approached, his arms crossed, his face tight. He looked like a man calculating outcomes that no longer favored him. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. Chioma stopped in front of him. "No," she replied. "I already made one. I'm correcting it." Vanessa appeared behind him, her voice sharp. "You can't just leave like this." Chioma looked at her once. Just once. "I can," she said. "And I am." Connell didn't touch her. He didn't lock the door. He didn't call security. He couldn't, because men like Connell are brave only when they feel safe. And Chioma had taken that safety away. The gate opened slowly as she stepped outside. The sun hit her face, warm and unforgiving. She felt exposed, visible. Her scalp tingled in the open air, and fear rose in her chest. Real fear, deep and physical. But beneath it was something else.
Clarity.
As the gate closed behind her with a heavy final sound, Chioma placed one hand on her belly and let out a long breath she didn't realize she'd been holding for months. She was scared, but she was alive. And survival, she understood now, was louder than humiliation. The story didn't break like news. It broke like truth usually does, quietly at first, passed hand to hand, screen to screen, whispered in messages that started with, "Have you seen this?" The video surfaced without commentary.
No dramatic captions. No explanations.
Just sound. The buzzing of clippers. A woman's voice begging. A man's laugh in the background. People watched in silence. Then the documents followed. Property deeds. Bank transfers. Voice notes. Dates that lined up too perfectly to deny intention. It wasn't just a moment of cruelty anymore. It was a pattern. Women recognized it immediately. They recognized the calm smile of a man who felt untouchable. They recognized the way pregnancy was used as leverage instead of protection. They recognized the silence that follows when no one intervenes. Messages poured in from everywhere. "I know this woman. This happened to my sister. I was told to endure. I stayed because I was afraid." Men watched too. Some defended Connell at first. Said it was a private matter. Said marriage was complicated. Said the internet was too quick to judge. But then they saw the evidence. Not edited. Not exaggerated. Documented. The questions changed. Why was he recording? Why was money moved? Why was control the goal? Connell's name began appearing in places it didn't belong. Business forums. Legal discussions. Investor calls.
Deals paused. Partners distanced themselves.
People who once praised his discipline began asking uncomfortable questions about his character. Vanessa vanished. Her social media went dark. Her phone stopped ringing. The confidence she'd worn like armor dissolved when the audience shifted from one man to millions. And Chioma? Chioma didn't hide. She didn't soften the truth. She didn't cover her head to make others comfortable. She stood exactly as she was, half-shaved, visibly pregnant, calm, and told her story without apology. Not to humiliate, but to warn. The world wasn't shocked that a man allowed cruelty. The world had seen that before. The shock was what followed. Because Chioma didn't fight with fists. She fought with evidence. And in doing so, she changed the conversation from shame to accountability, from silence to consequence, from endurance to truth. And once that door opened, it could not be closed again. And this is where we pause. Not because the story is finished, but because what comes next is heavier, sharper, and far more revealing. Part 2 is coming. That's where the real consequences unfold. The legal battles. The closed-door negotiations. The pressure from powerful people who don't want the truth to go further. And the moment Chioma realizes that surviving humiliation was only the beginning, standing in the aftermath would require even more courage. You'll see what happens when evidence meets influence. When money tries to silence truth. When a woman who refused to stay quiet is forced to choose how far she's willing to go. So before you go, I need to hear from you. Do you think Kunnel will face real consequences, or will power protect him? Do you believe Vanessa will resurface, or disappear forever? If you were Chioma, would you have gone public or taken a quiet settlement? And be honest, have you ever seen abuse and stayed silent because it felt safer? Drop your answers in the comments. I read them. The strongest ones get pinned. If this story moved you, like this video so it reaches more people who need to see it. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because part 2 will not be gentle, and you don't want to miss the moment the truth pushes back. Tell me where you're watching from. And tell me this, are you ready for part 2? Because once the world is watching, there's no going back.